The sun over Rio Blanco in 1874 doesn't just burn, it judges. Mara Ellison, once an army nurse who watched an innocent Comanche die by her own commander's order, now lives alone beside a red clay river, carrying guilt heavier than any saddle. One scream in the desert will force her to draw the scalpel again, this time to kill a rattlesnake and save a terrified boy she never should have met. What she doesn't know is that the child is bait. The hunters are closing in, and the price on his father's head might finally set her free, or bury her forever. Stay until the last echo of gunfire fades over the canyon. You'll never forget what one woman was willing to become for a boy who called her mother in a language she wasn't born to speak. Drop a comment. Where are you listening from tonight? Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so the desert never tells this story without you. The year is 1874, and the Rio Blanco runs thick with red clay, slow as blood through an old wound. Heat shimmers off the water like a lie you can see. On its southern bank, a single adobe hut leans into the wind, half its roof peeled away by last winter's storms. That is where Mara Ellison lives, or survives, depending on how honest the day feels. She is 32 and looks 50. Sun has burned the softness off her face, the way fire strips paint from pine. Her hair, once the color of fresh wheat, is now the shade of dust after a stampede. She keeps it twisted tight at the nape, held by a strip of rawhide that used to be a medical tourniquet. The only thing still soft about her is the scar that runs from the corner of her left eye down to the jaw. Thin, pale, precise. Souvenir from a Kiowa lance she never saw coming. 3 years ago, she wore a gray forage cap with a red cross on it and rode behind the 7th Cavalry. She stitched boys together while the bugle screamed charge, cut mini balls out of thighs by lantern light, and held the hands of kids who called for mothers they would never see again. Then came the day outside Fort Griffin, when they dragged a bound Comanche scout into the yard. He had surrendered under a white flag. Captain Jed Carver put a colt to the man's temple anyway, and told Mara to look away. She didn't. The hammer fell. The man's eyes stayed open, staring at her like she was the last thing on earth worth remembering. After that, she walked out of the army with nothing but the clothes on her back and the scalpel she still carries in a cracked leather sheath. Now she wakes before the stars quit, drinks coffee thick enough to float a horseshoe, and listens to the river argue with itself. The locals in Blanco Crossing say she talks to ghosts. They aren't wrong. Every dawn she walks the same quarter-mile to a bend where the cottonwoods grow crooked, and she speaks to the empty air the way other women speak to gravestones. She never says the dead man's name. She doesn't have to. Afternoon is the cruelest hour. The sun sits on the horizon like a branding iron waiting for skin. Mara steps out with an empty burlap sack, heading for the stand of yucca, where the dry stalks burn clean. The wind is a hot breath against her neck, carrying the smell of creosote and something older, death that never quite finishes. Her boots crunch over shale and sun-bleached bones of things that tried to cross this country and lost. That is when she hears it. Not a scream, not yet. Just a thin, broken sound, like a reed snapping inside a child's throat. It floats across the flats, almost lost beneath the cicadas. Mara stops. The sack slips from her fingers. She has heard that note before, on battlefields, in the back of ambulances. The sound a body makes when it still has breath, but no hope left. She runs. The scalpel is already in her hand, though she doesn't remember drawing it. Legs pumping, skirt hiked high, she tears through mesquite and devil's claw, thorns ripping her sleeves. The sound comes again, closer, desperate. She crests a low rise, and the desert opens its hand. 20 yards away, a boy stands barefoot in the sand. 8, maybe 9 winters. Skin the color of river clay after rain. His ribs show like slats on a broken crate. Blood crusts the soles of his feet, where cactus spines have done their work. And coiled in front of him, hood flared wide, rattling like dry death itself, is a diamondback thick as a man's wrist. The boy's eyes are huge, black, ancient. He doesn't move. The snake tastes the air between them. Time collapses. Mara is moving before thought, boots sliding in loose sand, scalpel raised like a saber. The rattler strikes, lightning fast, fangs flashing white. She twists, feels the wind of it graze her forearm, then brings the blade down in a short, vicious arc. Steel meets scale. The snake's head parts from its body in a single clean slice. Blood spits hot across the sand, hissing where it lands. Silence slams back in. The severed head keeps biting at nothing. The body whips and coils, painting red spirals on the ground. Mara kicks it away, chest heaving. Only then does she look at the boy. He is shaking so hard his teeth click. Tears have carved pale rivers through the dust on his cheeks. He stares at her, the way men used to stare at the horizon after battle, like he can't decide if what he's seeing is salvation or just another kind of ending. Mara lowers the scalpel. Her voice comes out rough, unused. "You're all right now." The boy opens his mouth. No words come, just a small animal sound of pure relief. Then his knees buckle, and he folds into the sand like something finally allowed to die. Mara sheathes the blade, steps forward and lifts him. He weighs next to nothing, bones and heat and terror. His head falls against her shoulder, hair smelling of smoke and sage. She feels his heart hammering against her own, two frightened things beating in the same cage. Overhead, a buzzard turns a slow circle against the brassy sky. Mara turns back toward the hut, the dead snake cooling behind her, the river still running red in the distance. She does not know the boy's name, does not know whose blood will come looking for him. She only knows one thing with perfect clarity. The desert has just handed her a second chance to finish what she started 3 years ago. And this time, she will not look away. The boy's fever broke sometime after moonset. Mara sat on the single stool, elbows on knees, watching the rise and fall of his narrow chest beneath her one good blanket. The hut smelled of blood, sage smoke, and the sharp iron tang of the scalpel she had boiled clean twice already. Outside, the wind prowled the walls like a wolf that hadn't decided whether to attack or just keep circling. When his eyes finally opened, they were clear, black, and far too old. "Connie," he said, answering the question she hadn't asked. One word, soft as a moth wing in the tongue of the Nokoni Comanche. She nodded once, accepting the gift of the name. "Water?" He drank from the tin cup like a colt at first sight of a trough, then lay back, staring at the smoke-blackened rafters. Mara waited. Children who have seen what this one has seen rarely speak quickly. Night slid into morning. She fed him thin cornmeal mush and a strip of jerky she had been saving for winter. He ate without taste, eyes flicking to every creak of the hut, every distant whinny carried on the wind. When she stepped outside to check the rabbit snares, he was at the door before her shadow crossed the threshold, bare feet silent on the packed clay. That was when she saw the tracks. They ringed the hut in a wide, careful circle. Moccasin prints, soft-soled, no heel drag. Bounty men's boots. Someone had come close enough in the dark to count the chinks in her wall and had left without making a sound. Near the yucca clump lay half a broken arrow. Cedar shaft, turkey feather fletching. The red paint still wet where it had scraped horsehide. Whoever stalked the boy knew he was inside. They were only waiting for better light. Mara's stomach went cold. She palmed the Colt she hadn't touched in 3 years, felt the familiar weight settle against her hip like an old debt coming due. By noon, the heat was a hammer. 2 riders appeared on the northern ridge, moving slowly, quartering the ground like hounds. Dust rose behind them in thin red plumes. Mara watched from the shadow of the door. Connie pressed against her leg, small fingers digging into her skirt. The men wore slouch hats and long dusters, despite the furnace air. Winchesters across their saddles. One had a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent half-grin. The other chewed a matchstick as it owed him money. They reined up 30 yards out. "Afternoon, ma'am," Scarmouth called, voice flat as a coffin lid. "Lose something?" Mara stepped into the light. The Colt stayed under her apron, but her thumb rested on the hammer. "Only my patience," she answered. "State your business, or ride on." Matchstick spat the splinter into the dirt. "Comanche pup been through here, worth 500 alive to the right people. More if he's breathing than if he ain't." Connie's grip tightened. Mara felt the tremor run through him like current through wire. "Lots of children wander these flats," she said. "Most of them don't belong to anybody. You'll have to be more particular." Scarmouth's grin widened. His eyes slid past her, measuring the half-open door, the single coffee pot on the coals, the small bare footprint still visible in the dust by the step. He touched his hat brim. "We'll be particular, ma'am." "Count on it." They turned their horses and walked them away slow, letting her see the rifles come up easy into their hands, letting her hear the creak of leather and the soft jingle of spurs that meant business. When the heat swallowed them, Mara looked down. Connie was staring after them with the flat, dead stare of something that already considers itself hunted. That night, she barred the door with the crossbeam, banked the fire low, and cleaned the Colt by lamplight. Connie sat cross-legged on the blanket, knees drawn up, watching her hands the way a starving man watches another man eat. "They killed my mother," he said suddenly, voice no louder than the lamp's hiss. "Shot her off her horse when she tried to carry me away. My father was gone hunting. They want me, so he will come for me. Then they will kill him too." Mara thumbed a cartridge into the cylinder. The metallic snap sounded loud in the small room. "Who wants him dead, Connie?" "Bluecoats first, then the men with the paper that has his picture. They say he raided the Butterfield stage. He did not. She believed him. She had seen the army write its own history in blood before. Outside, the wind dropped. The silence that followed was worse. Somewhere far off, a coyote barked once and was answered by nothing. Mara blew out the lamp. In the dark, she felt Connie crawl across the floor and curl against her side like a cold pup seeking warmth. She let him stay. Just before dawn, the temperature fell hard. Mara woke to the smell of rain that would never come. Connie was already at the door, ear pressed to the crack. "They are closer," he whispered. She looked out. On the ridge where the 2 riders had appeared yesterday, a single figure stood against the first pale streak of light. Tall, motionless, long braid moving only when the wind remembered it was there. Watching the hut, the way a wolf watches a lamb it has already decided to take. Mara's heart hammered once, hard against her ribs. The desert had sent its answer, and it was not finished with her yet. The figure on the ridge never moved, not once through the long, copper-colored dawn. Mara watched him until the sun cleared the horizon and burned him out of sight, leaving only heat ripples and the smell of iron in the air. Connie stood beside her. Her small hand slipped into hers without asking. For the first time since she'd carried him in, the boy's trembling had stopped. "He saw me," Connie said. "My father always sees." Mara didn't answer. She was too busy listening to the quiet that comes right before violence. Midday brought a stillness that made the skin crawl. Even the cicadas held their breath. Mara kept the Colt loaded and the scalpel within reach, moving in short, tight circles around the hut, like a wolf chained to a stake. Connie shadowed her every step, silent, learning the shape of danger, the way other children learn songs. By late afternoon, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. A sandstorm rolled in from the west, low and mean, swallowing the sun whole. Wind screamed across the flats, driving grit through every crack in the walls. Mara barred the door, lit the single lamp, and waited. Lightning walked the ridges on white-hot legs. In one flash, she saw him again. The same tall silhouette, now no more than 200 yards off, standing square into the storm, like it was nothing more than heavy rain. Braids whipping, shoulders unmoving, eyes fixed on the hut. The next flash erased him. Connie pressed his face to the shutter slit. "He's telling the wind to protect us tonight," thunder answered, deep as artillery. Mara felt the years peel off her like sunburnt skin. She had stood in storms before, but never one that carried a message. When the storm finally broke and crawled away to die over Mexico, the world was scoured clean. The moon rose thin and sharp, turning every pebble into a silver coin. Mara stepped outside to breathe air that tasted of lightning. The ridge was empty. Only a single set of moccasin prints led down the slope and stopped 20 paces from her door, then turned back the way they came. No hesitation, no hurry. A man who had come close enough to count heartbeats and chosen not to knock. Connie slept hard that night, the first real sleep since the snake. Mara did not. She sat with the Colt across her knees and listened to the desert reset its traps. Morning came in pale gold. She was drawing water when the arrow struck. It buried itself in the dirt between her boots with a soft, lethal thunk. Iron point, cedar shaft, 3 crimson feathers. A greeting, not a threat. Mara looked up. He stood on the same bank where she'd killed the rattler, paint across his cheeks the color of fresh blood, younger than the shadow on the ridge, but carrying the same stillness. A Henry rifle rested easily in the crook of his arm, yet the muzzle pointed at the ground. He raised his right hand, palm forward, then touched his heart. Slow, deliberate, the Nokoni sign for debt paid in life. Mara set the bucket down. The distance between them was maybe 40 yards of open sand, enough for either of them to kill the other twice before the echo died. "Connie is Tosah Black Horn's son," he called, voice carrying clear across the heat. "You held the future of the people in your hand and did not let it fall. My name is Kaito. I speak for the one who stood on the ridge last night." Mara's fingers brushed the Colt, then fell away. Something in the young warrior's eyes reminded her of the bound scout at Fort Griffin, same unblinking honesty right before the hammer dropped. "Speak then," she said. Kaito took one step forward. "The men who hunt the boy are paid by bluecoat lies. They will come again today, more of them, before the sun bleeds out. If you love life, ride east now." Mara glanced back at the hut. Connie stood in the doorway, small fist clenched around the blanket like a shield. "I quit running 3 years ago," she said. Kaito studied her for a long moment, the way a man studies a blade before trusting it to war. Then he nodded once, sharp as a knife cut. "Then stand ready. The storm only warned us." He turned to leave. That was when the first rifle shot cracked across the flats, high and flat and hungry. Dust exploded at Kaito's feet. He dropped into a crouch, Henry already rising. From the northern ridge, 6 riders fanned out, dusters flapping like buzzard wings, spurs ringing, rifles spitting fire. The quiet was murdered all at once. Mara snatched Connie by the arm, dragged him inside, and slammed the door. Through the shutter slit, she saw Kaito sprint for cover. returning fire with cool, measured shots that dropped the lead horse in a tangle of screaming legs. If you're riding this far with us, hit that subscribe button right now, because the next minutes decide whether a boy lives to see another sunrise and whether a woman finally pays the debt she's carried across 3 years of empty miles. Another bullet punched through the adobe an inch from her head, showering her with dust and broken clay. Mara shoved cartridges into the Colt, spun the cylinder, and looked at Connie. "Stay low," she said. "Whatever happens, you run when I tell you." The boy met her eyes and nodded. No tears, no fear, only the terrible calm of a child who has already buried his mother. Outside, Kaito's voice rose above the gunfire, fierce and unafraid. "Dead man's wish! To the canyon!" Mara grabbed the scalpel, the Colt, and the boy. The desert opened its jaws. They ran. Kaito in the lead, low and fast, boots barely kissing the ground. Mara, half carrying Connie, the boy's legs pumping like pistons, though terror had turned them to water. Bullets whined overhead, chipped rock into stinging hornets, kicked up geysers of red dust that tasted of gunpowder and old blood. Dead Man's Wish was a knife slash in the earth, a narrow canyon the color of dried liver, its walls rising sheer on both sides. The Nokoni said the spirits of warriors who died protecting children walked here unseen, guiding the living through. Mara had always figured that was poetry for good cover. Right now, she was willing to believe anything that kept breath in the boy. Kaito ducked into the slot first, Henry barking steadily, buying them seconds. Mara shoved Connie ahead of her, felt the heat of a bullet tug her sleeve as she followed. The canyon swallowed them whole, cool shadow slamming down like a coffin lid. The roar of gunfire behind turned muffled, echoing strangely, as though the rocks themselves were chewing the sound. They ran bent double, boots skidding on loose shale. The passage twisted like a snake with a broken back. Kaito paused only to jam a loose boulder into a crevice. When the first bounty man rounded the bend, the rock rolled free and took him screaming over the edge, rifle spinning into the void. 50 yards in, Kaito staggered. Blood soaked his left shoulder, black in the half-light. He gritted his teeth, switched the Henry to his right hand, and kept moving. "Keep going," he rasped. "Spirits favor speed." Another bend, then daylight flared ahead, a jagged white mouth. They burst out of the far end onto a shelf of rock overlooking a dry wash. Below, 3 riders waited, carbines already raised. They had split the party, guessed the canyon's throat. Kaito's eyes flicked once to Connie, once to Mara. Decision made in the space of a heartbeat. "Take him down the goat trail," he said. "I hold here." He was already turning, bringing the Henry up. Mara opened her mouth to argue, but the look he gave her carried the weight of generations. Some debts are paid in lead, not words. Connie screamed, "No!" But Kaito was already moving, walking backward into the canyon mouth, firing smooth and deliberate. The first bounty man dropped. The second horse reared, took a bullet meant for its rider, and crashed sideways. Kaito's war cry rose, raw, ancient, shaking dust from the walls like the canyon itself was answering. Mara grabbed Connie's wrist and ran. The goat trail was a scar on the cliff face, barely wide enough for a mountain sheep. Loose gravel spilled under every step. Halfway down, a rifle cracked behind them. Rock chips exploded near Connie's head. Mara spun. Colt, bucking twice. High above, Kaito's silhouette wavered against the sky, then folded slowly, like a man finally allowing himself to sit after a very long day. Silence fell, sudden and complete. They hit the wash running. Heat slammed back into them, thick and merciless. Connie's breath sawed in and out, but he didn't slow. Ahead, the land opened into a wide bowl of sand and creosote, and in the middle of it, blocking the only way forward, sat a single rider on a government-branded bay. Jed Carver. He looked older than sin, face burned the color of saddle leather, eyes sunk deep from whiskey, and worse. His left hand held the reins, his right rested on a Schofield pointed loose at the ground. A captain's bars, tarnished and crooked, still clung to his collar like a bad joke. Mara stopped 10 yards out, shoved Connie behind her. The colt came up steady. "Step aside, Jed." Carver's mouth worked, chewing on words he didn't want to spit. Blood stained the corner of his mustache. Someone had worked him over recently. "I figured you'd come this way," he said. Voice gravel dragged over broken glass. "Always did take the hard trail, Mara." He reached slowly into his coat, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, yellowed, edges curling, held it out. "Wanted poster. Tosah Black Horn. 5,000. Dead. They're saying he hit the Butterfield stage last month. Burned it, killed the driver, took the strongbox." Carver's laugh cracked like dry wood. "Except I wrote that report myself. My boys did the burning. Needed the land cleared for the railroad survey. Tosah never touched it. He let the paper flutter to the sand. Been living with that lie 3 years, he whispered. Same as you've been living with the scout I shot in the yard." Mara's finger whitened on the trigger. Behind them, hoofbeats, closing fast. The remaining bounty men, smelling blood. Carver looked past her to Connie, something raw and dying in his eyes. "Get the boy clear," he said. "Let me square one thing before I rot." He started to lift the Schofield toward the approaching riders. A single shot cracked from the ridge. Carver jerked, red blooming high on his chest. He stayed upright a second longer, eyes locked on Mara, then toppled sideways out of the saddle, dead before he hit the ground. The wash erupted in gunfire. Mara snatched Connie, dove behind Carver's fallen horse. Lead thudded into meat and leather. She rose once, fired 3 times, and saw the lead rider tumble. Then she was up, dragging Connie toward the far slope, legs burning, lungs raw. Behind her, the desert drank more blood, and the trail to the Nokoni camp still lay miles ahead. The last mile was a furnace. Mara's boots dragged through sand that sucked at every step like quicksand made of fire. Connie clung to her back now, arms locked around her neck, his breath hot against her ear. Behind them, the gunfire had thinned to sporadic cracks, then nothing. Only the wind remained, carrying the smell of burnt powder and fresh death. They crested the final rise as the sun bled itself out across the western ridges. Below, in a hidden bowl, the color of old copper, lay the Nokoni camp. Teepees of smoke-stained buffalo hide stood in a loose half-moon around a spring-fed creek. Horses nickered. Children scattered like quail at the sight of strangers. Cooking fires painted the evening red. From the shadows of the tallest lodge stepped a man. Tosah Black Horn. He wore no war paint, no feathers, only a plain calico shirt and a bone-handled knife at his belt. Yet the air itself seemed to bend around him the way heat bends above a forge. His eyes found Connie first, then Mara, and in them was something older than gratitude and deeper than grief. Connie slid from her back and ran. Bare feet slapped dust. Then he was airborne, slamming into his father's chest. Tosah caught him one-handed, pressed the boy's face into his shoulder, and for a long moment, the only sound was the wind worrying the lodge poles. When Tosah finally looked up again, the camp had gone still. Old men, women with infants on cradle boards, young warriors with rifles half raised, all waited on the chief's word. He set Connie down, walked forward until he stood an arm's length from Mara. She was swaying on her feet, blood and dust caked thick, colt empty, scalpel lost somewhere in the canyon. She had nothing left to offer except the truth. Tosah studied her, the way a man studies a storm that has passed over his land, and left both ruin and rain. He placed his right hand flat over his heart, then turned it palm up and lowered it slowly to the ground. The Nokoni gesture of highest honor, given only when a life debt can never be repaid. Around them, rifles lowered. A low murmur rose, part prayer, part recognition. An old woman with silver braids stepped forward. Her eyes were sharp as obsidian flakes. "The river remembers blood," she said in slow English. "But tonight it will also remember the woman who carried a child through fire." She reached out, pressed something small and hard into Mara's hand, a disc of polished copper, sun symbol etched deep, warm from the woman's skin. Tosah spoke then, voice low, steady, carrying no farther than the space between them. "Kaito walks with the grandfathers now. He bought my son's life with his own. You bought it twice." Mara closed her fist around the copper disc until the edges bit. "I didn't do it for payment." "I know," Tosah said. "That is why the debt stands." Night folded over the camp. Someone brought her water. Someone else a bowl of stew thick with wild onion and rabbit. She ate without tasting, sitting on a log while Connie, washed clean and wrapped in a new blanket, fell asleep against her side. The drums began, soft, steady, the heartbeat of a people who had almost lost their tomorrow. Later, when the fires burned low and the stars pressed close, Mara walked alone to the spring that fed the creek. She knelt, cupped water, let it run through her fingers, the color of weak coffee. The copper disc went into her pocket. The scalpel she drew from her boot sheath, the same blade that had killed a rattler, cut bandages on dying soldiers, and once failed to stop a bullet meant for an innocent man. She looked at it for a long time, then she placed it flat on the water's surface. The steel caught the moonlight once, bright as a promise, before the current took it. It turned over twice and vanished under the bank, swallowed by the same red river that had watched her begin this journey. Behind her came small footsteps. Connie, barefoot again, blanket trailing. He stopped beside her, looked at the dark water, then up at her face. "Mara," he said, testing the name like it was new medicine. "Mother of the brave ones." The word struck harder than any bullet. She felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been boarded up since Fort Griffin. She rested a hand on his head, felt the fine black hair, the warmth of a skull that would grow into a man. The drums in the camp rose, steady, strong, carrying them both forward. Rio Blanco kept flowing, red as ever, but slower now, as though it too had decided some debts were finally paid. The fires are out now, and the Rio Blanco runs quietly under a new moon. Mara Ellison walked into that darkness, carrying a boy's hand, and left behind a past that no longer owned her. Some stories don't end with a hanging or a wedding. They end with a river taking the blade and giving back silence. If this one carved something into you, anger, hope, or just the ache of the long ride, drop it in the comments. Tell me where the wind found you tonight, what you'd have done on that red riverbank. Your words keep these trails alive, until the next dust storm carries another lost soul our way. Ride easy, keep your powder dry, and I'll see you down the trail.